Okay. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your coffees and your pisco sours. Now we've got a defense panel, which is about bringing quantum and AI innovation to the fore in a hostile world, a theme that we've actually covered in many ways in some of the earlier panels, because the line between civilian defense has become totally blurred. So I'd like to welcome the chair of the panel, Major General James Chiswell, Rear Admiral Nick Wheeler from NATO, Enrique Lizazo from Multiverse, and Gillian Marshall from QinetiQ.
Well, folks, really warm welcome to this next panel. We're going to try and answer three questions, or frame it around three questions. One is kind of what potential utility do we see, particularly quantum. We're going to focus more on quantum than AI and sort of high-performance compute. But what utility do we see quantum potentially having within the defense and security arena? Secondly, we're going to tackle what do institutions need to be thinking about? What do they need to be doing in order to fully realize the potential of this technology? And then we're going to take a founder's view in terms of bring it down to sort of practical. What are people actually building at the moment, and what are the challenges that they're finding? Before I do that, I might just ask the panel. It's a pretty august gang. Just to introduce themselves, I'll then perhaps just say some opening words, and then we'll get into it. So thank you. Gillian, please.
I'm Gillian Marshall from QinetiQ. I'm an engineer, not a quantum physicist, and I am the global capability lead for QinetiQ on quantum technology, and I'm charged with trying to make something useful happen for defense in QinetiQ with quantum tech.
Good afternoon. My name's Nick Wheeler. I am the director of the NATO Digital Staff, which is an integrated civilian and military staff working in NATO headquarters in Brussels. We're charged with looking at mostly the policy and strategy space around how technology is employed, and in particular digital transformation of the alliance is the area we focus on, which obviously includes a strong strand of how emerging and disruptive technologies will be brought into the alliance. And that's me.
Oh, thank you. I am Enrique Lizazo. I am the co-founder and CEO of Multiverse Computing, which is a company that works in the particular and difficult field of quantum computing. At this moment, this is the largest company in Europe and probably in the United States after some unintended evolution of the markets for somebody. Mathematician myself, and if you dig enough in my LinkedIn profile, you will see that I am also a medical doctor, but better for you not to be treated by me at this moment. And also some nice other things. In the company, I'm just the CEO, so I'm trying just to scale it up fast and earn our life from this field, which is astounding, given that the quantum computers are what they are. So one question is, what are you doing exactly with your company, boys, just to make a way of living from that?
Great, thank you, Enrique. Folks, I think one of the bits that's come out from Karina's opening introductions at the start of this and through the other panels is that one of the characteristics, perhaps, of this increasingly divided world and the pace of technological change is the blurring of boundaries, the convergence, if you like, but the blurring of boundaries, particularly as we would see it, between peace and war, between home and away, between truth and non-truth, between attributable, non-attributable. And it would be, of course, an oversimplification to think that one can compartmentalize a conversation, around defense and security. It's also very clear that the technologies that we are talking about are or are likely to become the fabric upon which society functions. They are technologies that absolutely span that spectrum from normal, good, global financial competition, if you like, on one side, through a spectrum of resilience, security, and to the harder end of defense on the other. And increasingly, if you like, these technologies are becoming theaters of competition in their own right. Whoever prevails gets unfair advantage at any one of those steps across that spectrum, as I've mentioned. But for the purpose of this session, let us take it through the lens from, if you like, from the right-hand end of the spectrum, really looking at defense and security kind of specifically. And I'm going to ask Gillian, if you would, perhaps to sort of bring us on the page. What are the sorts of utilities, and let us bring it through the lens of quantum, take it wherever you want from there. But both, what are the sort of capabilities, but perhaps most importantly in that regard, what needs to happen to get us there, and what are some of the tertiary issues that are around that? Thanks.
Well, I'd like to go and split it out, I think, into quantum computing and quantum everything else, because I think they're actually quite different. You've heard quite a lot about quantum computing already today. When it happens at scale, it is going to be revolutionary. We are going to be able to do things that we cannot do at the moment. And I think at the moment we're trying to work out in the industry, what does that mean for us? And my view at the moment is that one of the things we may be able to do is to build a quantum digital twin. Now that's a lot of buzzwords, but having a quantum model of a physical system such that we can play what if at the design phase and be helping to go and design new capabilities. There's quite a lot that needs to be done before you can get there. And that's not all going to be done by the defense industry. We're going to have to work in partnership with the people who are supplying the software, the algorithms, and the quantum computers to try to match up the use cases with the requirements and build a potential capability. So that's long term. It will require a large-scale, error-corrected quantum computer, and I'm not going to guess when that might be. Ellen can probably give a better guess than me, but I will be well retired. But then on the other side, and I think in the shorter term, there's quantum sensing. And we've not heard an awful lot about that today. But things like position, navigation, and timing, a critical defense capability, and actually vastly important in the civilian world as well. If we lose our GPS capability or the equivalents, then we don't know where we are. Your autonomous vehicles aren't going to work, and your autonomous military vehicles aren't going to work. So having a quantum-enhanced position, navigation, and timing capability that allows you to know where you are and when you are, I think is something that will be an evolutionary capability. It's stuff we can do at the moment, but we should be able to do better with quantum technology. And that's what I think is likely to happen in the shorter to more medium term, while we're still waiting for quantum computers to come along in scale. But in order to make that happen, we need to have a transition from technology to capability. We need to be able to get the quantum technology out of the hands of the physicists and into the hands of the warfighter and the end user. And that's going to mean building new capabilities in industry, in quantum engineering, so to be able to go and build things replicably at scale that fit a purpose and actually meet a customer requirement. And that, I think, is something that we in the defense industry should be helping the technologists do in the short term.
Enrique, can I come to you, and just picking up the point that Gillian perhaps makes, which is this transition, if you like, from sort of, if you like, a classical computing viewpoint to a quantum technology or quantum capability. I think you're much involved in that transition, a recognition that one doesn't have to wait for sort of ground zero of a full computer. There is stuff that can be can be exploiting at the moment. Do you want to just talk about what does that journey feel like for us?
Yes, this is an important question, I should say, because this is the key just to set up and run a company, a particular for-profit company. If you are waiting just too long to provide some, let's say, revenues or even profits, maybe this is not a company but a charity, which is a different kind. Yeah, all right. Okay. The point, I will tell you about the point of view from a company, a quantum software company. And this is slightly different. I mean, from our point of view, quantum computing particularly, I'm not talking about quantum sensing or so on, or communications, but quantum computing is just a race of two horses. On one hand, you have the quantum computers. They are providing better and better quantum computers. And every time they claim that we have achieved a quantum supremacy, the quantum computer is solving that it's not solvable with other classical current computers. Okay, some nice guy appears with a particularly mathematical trick or just some solutions, and he say, okay, I just make it run faster than a quantum computer. Next, the quantum computer improves, and then the other, and then the other. On the long term, okay, it's not that. If a quantum computer, full-fledged quantum computer, is going to happen, this is going to make obsolete the other methods. But on the meanwhile, those classical methods, those benchmarks that we use to check whether a quantum computer is powerful enough or not, that has a lot of sense if you want to make money. You may say, this is just classical computer. It is not. I mean, in the same case that a car is just a car until it is a Ferrari, which is a different thing. So you can use that just to mimic some quantum computer solutions in a faster and more precise way and more economical than the classical solutions that those, let's say, other solutions are running. And then you can solve something interesting, cheaper, and just in a more precise way. We can talk about that later. See if you want me to show some use cases, particularly clear and use cases.
Great. I can just bring it back, perhaps Gillian, to you. Back to the topic around integrity, trust, verification. Don't necessarily need to dwell on it, but perhaps landing the point that kind of AI is finding itself in quite a serious, but maybe here in the UK not too badly pursued, catch-up kind of around what are the protocols that need to be in place to give some confidence around the data that's made up. We perhaps have a chance to get ahead of the curve around quantum. Kind of what's your view around what needs to happen to bring stronger protocols into place?
We need to really think about quantum test and evaluation, particularly I think in the military. Are we buying what we think we're buying? Does it do what it says on the tin? And that can be quite challenging with a quantum technology, with all of the issues of probabilistic behavior, and if you look at the qubits wrong, they collapse. You've got to think about how are you going to do test and evaluation of a quantum-enabled or even a quantum-enhanced system. And I think we need to start thinking about that now, such that when the capability is there, we know what we're going to do with it. And from a military angle, we also need to be thinking about the concept of operations, the concept of employment. What are we going to do with this? How are we going to use it? Where do we want to use it? What are the security implications around it? There's a whole lot of things that we need to be thinking about that's not just the technology, but it's about how we use it, how we trust it, how we verify that it does what it says on the tin. And I think that's something that the industry needs to get to grips with.
Yeah, and it's an oversimplification to perhaps just say that there needs to be a human in the loop, which is often the sort of default setting, when one's moving to sort of autonomy and robotics, and particularly kinetic effect. Because even if one has a human in the loop, upon what basis they're still making judgments around data, and how confident can they be in the authority of that data? It's a clear and present challenge right now, and presumably is one that, that gets amplified. Nick, let me come to you and just talk really around how institutions should be thinking about preparing for this, and maybe, Brig, give us some sort of practical examples in Brussels.
Yeah, thank you. I'll start with an observation. It's sort of based on what my colleagues here have both talked about already, but I think the perspective with a uniform where it might be useful. One of the challenges that we have in this is about understanding and literacy between the two communities, between the sort of theoretical end and the startups doing some really exciting, highly theoretical work, and the practical end, the warfighter that's been alluded to. And at the moment, I do think there's a significant distance between those two communities, and it's maybe not an air gap, but it's certainly it's a bit of a the communication is not necessarily how it should be. Because the success if you look at previous generations where quite often defence was driving technological change, which is certainly not the case now, partly due to scale and partly just due to the way that our societies now work, means that there isn't a common language that we can have around what are the operational requirements, what are the challenges we're trying to fix that quantum might be an answer for, which would then help us to come up with practical proposals for how we can take some of these technologies forward and deliver them into the hands of defence. What can organisations do about that? Well, there's definitely some internal, we have the ability to learn and to teach our people and to employ the right, we can recruit the right kind of skills into our organisations. And I don't necessarily mean in a uniform, but in our organisations so we can have intelligent conversations about these topics. NATO certainly regards itself as having a role around setting of policy and strategy at a very high level to allow all of its nations to make some early steps in this space. And I think NATO particularly has a role around a convening power that it has of having 32 nations now. We've got our 32nd member this year. And that's 32 nations who can sit around the table and can discuss these topics and can come up with some joint ways to move forward. That has a number of advantages. It has one particularly just purely around the ability to potentially group together around how you move forward in terms of procurement. I know defence looks like it's got enormous budgets, but a hell of a lot of our budgets are highly committed to other things that will not necessarily be the cutting-edge technologies. So actually the amount of money we've got to spend is relatively small when you look at it in those terms. So if we can club together, suddenly we've got some spending power, which could be interesting. The other thing, which NATO always talks about it being in their part of their DNA, is around standardisation, around how we deliver interoperability by defining standards. And that's often a bit of a problem. People don't like standards because maybe that curtails innovation. I don't think that has to be the case. I think if you do your standards right, it can actually encourage innovation, because what it actually allows is you set up the conditions to allow different firms, different nations to be able to share and to be able to work together because they know they're going to be working to a particular standard. So I think there's plenty that the organisations can do. And just touching on one again, we've already talked about a little bit. In the AI area particularly, NATO's been doing quite a lot of interesting work around responsible use of the technology. So agreeing a set of ethical standards that all of the alliance nations and their partner nations can sign up to about the way that these technologies will be used. So self-regulatory in the defence sphere, you could look at it in those terms.
Yeah, and I suppose just add there, of course, the disaggregated nature of technology brilliance that, once governments might felt that they owned, they were at the forefront of science. We've been through perhaps a period when the primes might be seen as such, but of course increasingly it goes way beyond, whether it's coming out of sort of universities or whether it's coming out of sheds in places, wherever that might be. And how one transmit to those founders the responsibility they should have to understand how their technology might be used and importantly help potential users understand how it can be best exploited. I support occasionally the International Committee of the Red Cross, particularly around how technology is changing the ways in war, and what does that mean for the laws of war, and how do you help those who are in significantly influential positions to be to ensure that its thought kind of all the way through. I mention it because I think there'll be many founders in the room here who need to be thinking, indeed, in these sorts of terms. Nick, I'm going to come back to you though. I wonder if you can, if it's fair, just give us some sort of practical examples about preparing an institution, and whether that's around skills or whatever that kind of might be useful for people here.
So one I'm going to pick on, we've kind of talked a little bit about it in the first panel we had earlier on today, but I think it's worth going back to because just to maybe have some reassurance that we are thinking hard about these problems. So I think it was Steve on the first panel talked about cryptography and the effect that quantum potentially has on cryptography, and talked about the 3% chance in 5 years. That's absolutely true. But it's actually a today problem for us. It's a very real problem today because our potential adversaries can record our communications, our encrypted communications now, store it, and then wait until the quantum capabilities are there and go back and decode at their leisure. So that is a problem for us right now today, and it's a way of thinking about how we approach our current communications that we have to factor in. And therefore it drives us to look at how we protect ourselves, and was touched on about post-quantum cryptography earlier on, and it's certainly something that, again, how does NATO set a standard for that particular, for that kind of technology, so we can get it rolled out into all of our systems as early as possible. So there's one practical example. Where we're perhaps not doing as well is, I would suggest, in the skills area, it's really challenging. Traditional military skills are not necessarily based around science and technology. My background is as a submariner warfare officer. I drove submarines for a living. Some of you, I spoke to you last year about that particular topic. So these, what initially feel like highly technical, extremely complex topics, are not something that naturally we employ people who've got those skill sets. We're getting slightly better at this. The advent of cyber has particularly driven us to look at employing from different sectors and how we can work and how we can partner. But I think we could do better.
Julian, do you want to add on skills?
I think this is going to be a really important thing to think about. It's difficult to attract people with the right skills, particularly when there are startups who can pay an awful lot more. It's difficult to retain people with the right skills. And I think in the military domain, we need to have a mixture of people who are quantum literate and defense literate. They need to understand the use cases, and they need to understand how the technology might do that. So do I take people who are quantum physicists and train them up in defense use cases? That might take 20 years to really get them to know it inside out. Or do I take people who understand the defense use cases, because they've done it for 20 years, and now try to teach them quantum physics? That doesn't work either. So there's a big problem, I think, with vocabulary, with language, and having both sides able to talk to each other. And I think that that's something that the industry is going to have to think about, is training up maybe middle career people to become at least partially quantum literate, so that they can make sense of what the really bright juniors who are coming out of the universities with their PhDs in quantum physics but don't have a clue about how you might use it in practice. We've somehow got to get those two ends to meet, and that's not easy.
No, thanks, Gillian. I'm sure that kind of profession-related skills challenge, will apply wherever it is. I'm sure Colin Bell on the next panel will be able to talk about the finance sector, about how you balance expertise and that sort of technical background. Enrique, should we try and bring this into the into sort of the practical about sorts of things that startups, if you like, are building today in this domain? Yeah.
Yes, I think. You must know that about 40% of our project came from the defense field at this moment. So we are just selling about 20 million euros a year, quite small, just for defense, but large for the quantum field. So what exactly are we doing? Remember that before I have spoken about that we also use those quantum-inspired algorithms that we develop and running classical computers. So the idea basically is those algorithms, particularly those that came from a particular field which is called technically tensor networks, nothing to do with TensorFlow, okay, are particularly well adapted to AI solutions, and AI is exploding. So if you just convert or use those algorithms to solve an AI problem, then you end with a solution that is smaller, more precise most of the times, and particularly cheaper to run. Cheaper to run means that this solution may run in just one GPU, and that means a lot of money if you want to develop some devices that are cheap enough just to run or to be built by the thousands, which is a particular point of interest for the people in defense, how to just apply those advanced solutions. For example, I mean, and that's public, I can comment some projects we are in. One of them is with the FCAS, which is the Future Air Combat plane in Europe. This is the FCAS, and what we are doing there is processing data for the data captured by the radar. So identifying potential just targets or just determining which is the terrain, etc., etc. Remember that this is an environment where the energy is sparse. I mean, you cannot use a lot of energy. You have to use very few, if you can, computer power, okay? And the weight is something that you have just to take out of the equation. So this is quite a small system. If you use exactly the same image processing system, you can apply that, or we are applying that, and this is also public, to Airbus, just to control or to help control the plane with gestures. I don't know which gestures. I suppose that this is up and this is down. And some other, if the plane crashes, I suppose that there are some other particular gestures and so on. But this is something that is complex also, and you have to provide, okay, as a new kind of interface. And talking about interface, and this is also something that we are just planning to do. You know that we have our large language models, which are super large. They consume a lot of energy, etc., etc., etc. But, and this is not something that is theoretical, but is currently happening. If you take an LLM and you compress the LLM large enough just to fit inside a GPU, a single GPU, you can use this LLM in some other nice devices. Okay, you can put, as a large provider of LLMs propose us, in classes, but you can also put in a drone, and everybody knows what a drone is, and so on. And you can imagine some nice usages of this mix of technologies in a particular environment or defense environment. And more and more and more like that. Usually, most of the time, the people are interested in image processing in smaller chips and so on. I mean, we are running one project with, in this case, is Accenture, I think, and this is about detecting, okay, in a particular frontier of the European Union, where could be some particular devices, tanks, okay, in a camouflage mode. So. And where should you put those kind of solutions? Okay, you may put that in a satellite, fine. You know that in a satellite the energy is even a few smaller, or you can put that inside drones. But to put in a drone, that should be in a small drone because the cost shouldn't be so much, etc., etc., etc. So everything matches. I'm just speaking too much, sorry.
Enrique, that's great. Thank you. Folks, let's take it to the floor, perhaps. Any questions, please, from him? Yeah, thank you. There's a few. Please, the lady.
Thank you, Viviana from OQC. I just have a question for the panel. At the moment, export for quantum computers is capped to 34 qubits. I just wanted to understand what is the reason why we're trying to expand the technology and create value streams around the world to understand what are the benefits we can get. Is it to do with the defense aspect, or just because we want to know more about it? Why is CAP in the UK? I am not aware that it's a CAP in anywhere else in the world.
Can I see if anyone in the panel has got an answer. Otherwise, I might actually go to the floor to see if there's a good answer. Gillian, will you?
My guess is that because it's about that level of qubits, it gets very difficult to simulate it classically. And so, therefore, they've picked that number because, that's you can't do that. You can't do much more than that classically. I personally don't think you're going to get an awful lot of real advantage from something with that small number of qubits at the moment, especially since they are noisy and not error corrected. But I suspect it's a pragmatic thing that beyond that you can't simulate it classically very well. I'm willing to be corrected by anyone on the floor who understands the policy.
Would someone, is that a hand up for an answer to that question or a new question?
Hi there, Gibson Armstrong with Trek. With China investing in quantum as much of the rest of the world combined, we cannot win the spending battle. What competitive advantages can we bring to bear to ensure that we do not lose the quantum race?
So, Gillian, I'm going to come to you first, and then Enrique, I'm going to give you a chance just to comment about kind of the entrepreneurial viewpoint, I guess, of the West.
So, I don't know whether...
Nick, Nick, it looks like Nick, should we start with Gillian and then come to... We'll roll down the panel.
Well, it's clearly a worry, and I think the first thing we've got to do is to understand what the capabilities could be. What could somebody do with these? What is the limit to what can be sensed, to what can be computed? I think we have to understand what the potential threat might be before we get overly worried about it. And then having understood what could be done, we need to work out what are the things that we really do need to be working on to get a sovereign capability or a capability with our allies. And I think we're going to have to partner. We can't do it all ourselves. There is no way the UK can be a leader in absolutely everything. We haven't got the budget. So how are we going to work, particularly I think within the AUKUS framework, to work together with our allies, but first having understood what the things are that it's important that we get to first.
Nick, you should...
I'll be really quick. I kind of already said this. Actually, it's the power of diversity here. So there's 30 nations plus a whole bunch of partners, Australia, New Zealand, that we work with very closely. So the ability to access all of their data, the ability to access all of their academia, the ability to be able to then find established standards that we can share, that we can interoperate. I think that's actually incredibly powerful, and that might be part of the answer. I mean, it's not necessarily about how much we've spent, it's about how we spend cleverly is the answer, surely.
Well, I am on the side of any kind of investment that you make, I mean, that should be providing some kind of return, okay? Maybe it's not the return that pure quantum computing that you want at this time, but it is longer, but you have also just to have a look at what you are producing along the way. I mean, stories full of stories where you are just pursuing some idea, and then you have additional new tools that you are developing. And those may pay for the full investment, and this is what the case. But this is a different part of the equation I represent. Yeah.
So a difficult one. The leverage that an autocracy can bring versus the sort of wider opportunities perhaps of our ways. Please, let me come to the lady here.
Hi, my name is Nastasia. I'm with Google Quantum AI, but I'm also Ukrainian. And I might have missed this because I was slightly late for this presentation. But, well, how is the war, I guess, changing and it's informing your work on AI and quantum? Because obviously we have drones powered by AI. We have spoofing and everything that is kind of changing the way people were thinking about the precision of certain weapons. So, could you place this topic in the context of the war?
Nick, let me come to you.
So I don't really have an answer on quantum because I must admit I've not seen that as being a particularly big factor. But AI absolutely is part of the equation. That's the way that the war is being fought in Ukraine. So what have we learned? We've learned that when you're in a war for your national existence, that the rules change a bit, and it allows you to rapidly innovate and then move that innovation into the front line at incredible speeds. I mean, what they're doing is absolutely stunning and amazing to watch. So solutions are being found, they're being employed literally hours later on occasion, and they're employed as long as they work, and when they stop working because the enemy learns how to counter them, they innovate again and they move forward in a way that is incredible to watch. We can take some lessons from that. There's a reality though. We are constrained in how much we're able to do that, whether it be for legal and regulatory reasons about the way that we have to go through different processes. I'll use NATO as an example. We are a highly bureaucratic organization. We are not ideally suited to rapid innovation and its employment. Now, the deputy head of the innovation unit is talking to you later on, so I won't steal any of his comments. I'm sure he'll talk about that. But it's a real challenge for big organizations. It's not unique to defense, it's not unique to NATO, for how we can get innovative ideas out of the laboratory and into play quickly, because it's just not easy when you're dealing with the bureaucracies that we have. I could talk for hours about, maybe if you want to talk more later, but yeah, we are watching closely, and we work extremely closely with our Ukrainian colleagues. We have them in the building as a partner nation with us. We do an awful lot of work with them around because they employ NATO standards in a lot of what they're doing in their innovation space, because they have an aspiration to one day be a candidate nation. Therefore, using NATO standards makes sense for them. I slightly joke about this, and I know I'm in a public forum here, but I often say Ukraine is almost more NATO compliant than some of the longer term nations in the way that they apply standards.
We might come back to before we finish, just this relationship between the private sector and defence, if you like, the relationship between the next wave of solutions and those who own these problems. Andrew,
Air Marshal Andrew Turner from Space Foresight. I think what you just said, Nick, is exactly where we need to take the previous question, which is the journey on drones, just like it was around time-sensitive targeting or some other military innovations over the last 20 years, is exactly what quantum needs in defence. And that is to say, if you were to copy the US Air Force's research laboratory, they've set key tasks to resolve critical national risks. They've set deadlines, they've got windows of deliverability, and they've got targets, and they've set cash against it. If we were to be sensing the same at home in our capital here in Brussels and the other capitals around the 32, we might also set the same challenge, technical challenge, a sprint in some senses. We've got this problem, it needs to be solved, we need to convene experts, talk in common language, speak simply, and assign some either NATO Diana, NIF or national capital to get after it. So my contention is, isn't that time now? The headlines and horizons for quantum timing and communications are inside this parliament. Computing probably just the next one, but they're now, they're upon us. And my contention would be an outcome of the national SDR might be some of these things, but that's just UK. There are other 31 nations we should be talking about. So the question is, why wouldn't we set some stretching, task-defined outcomes to be solved by technology and finance inside this parliament?
From a NATO perspective, again, I'm really conscious of not stealing a later speaker's sandwiches, but I think that we're moving there. There is an organisational inertia we need to overcome, and that's the real challenge. And it takes some evangelists in the organisation to be shouting from the rafters. I think I count myself amongst one of those, and to just keep banging the drum whenever we can. Again, I'll save blushes of various senior leaders. I think we need to get a leadership collectively that thinks differently. It doesn't automatically go, oh, it's technology, it's all too difficult. No, they need to be recognising that that's not an acceptable answer any longer. But it's going to take a bit more, as I say, some good evangelism is probably one way to go.
Yeah, Andy, I don't know whether you've got any more to add, but so I guess and it's really what comes out, thank you, from the question on Ukraine is kind of, in tragic circumstances where Ukraine is on a burning platform that is really obliging its best technology to focus on the nation's most critical challenges. there is a question about how one establishes that same sense of a burning platform, say in here in the UK, that brings these together. This building in 1941, 1942 would have had that imperative. I would offer that I think in the Strategic Defence Review, which is playing now, there will be two core themes, I think. One will be around an integrated force, around instead of seeing solutions in single service stovepipes, how do you bring all of this together and therefore best be able to exploit these technologies? And how do you move government to a different relationship with the private sector in this lane? We'll see. Next question, please.
I was given a mic.
Yeah, please. Sorry. Yeah. Go for it.
Jeremy Wimble, I run the defence programme at Tech UK, the trade association. When we talk about sort of supporting SMEs and building that sort of diverse sort of innovation ecosystem, normally comes back to cash, and it normally comes back to procurement. Putting those particular hot potatoes to one side, what very, very practical things can government be doing in order to support that broader tech ecosystem? We have members say to us, synthetic data sets. We need access to stuff, even if it's synthetic, that we can start training our systems on. What more can be done, and particularly from an innovator, from a doer perspective, what more do you want to be getting from government in order to support that sort of broader technological change?
Gillian, has to be you.
I would say that what I want to see is some clear requirements, maybe coming back to the stretch targets. What is it that we want to achieve? We've got the quantum missions, but they're very big and broad and not really granular enough. So what do we actually want to do? And then there needs to be funding, because people aren't going to invest unless they see a return on investment. And so you've got to have that mix of, well, this is what we want, and if you build it, then we will buy one. Maybe the government needs to explicitly be an early adopter of this technology so that we can try to force it out of the door.
I would add one thing, actually. So traditionally, in defence, we've always had a strong sense of, we talk about need to know. That's our basis of where we deal with our security, and it makes it very difficult for us to share. So we need to sort of move culturally the whole of our thinking around the way that we share information between nations, and then also between different sectors within our nations as well. So NATO talks about the need to share as opposed to the need to know. Easy thing to say at a very high level, much more difficult to deliver. So you have to build trust, and nations have to stick their necks out a bit here and try to be able to share a bit more of their data, a bit more of their information, and see whether that generates a positive effect.
Thank you. And I'm sure that sort of Gillian's messages apply to other sectors, of course, for those who are responsible for adopting this sort of technology, setting a clear requirement and putting some money aside. Please, sorry, you've been very patient over there. Thank you.
So, as we see that with drones, there's increasingly jamming that's happening, so the GPS signal can't get through. So the role of AI is very important, but especially, quantum AI, because quantum AI can help you make decisions with very few data points in very noisy environments, much more than standard AI. So are you seeing something about, like quantum AI on those drones that can possibly give an advantage over the enemy who has classical algorithms that are slower to adapt?
I'm going to ask Enrique, do you want to come to that?
Yes, I mean, well, the drones are going to be independent. I mean, this is something that is going to happen sooner or later. I mean, you can imagine we are just seeing the first stages of the new, let's say, AI with the LLMs. This is going to happen to the drones. The drones are going to have their own criteria. And even that if we want to put a man in the middle, that's the case as now, I don't know whether this is going to happen in the future if an enemy decides not to put a man in the middle. So this is one thing. Okay. The other thing is you have to give the drones, let's say, some kind of navigational abilities, skills, without relying on let's say, on GPS for sure. Some others. I mean, that should be. And finally, and this is important as well, and this is something that is not related exactly to the question, but it's also important, the price should be quite low. I mean, one thing is just make, let's say, some combat with a drone, and a completely different thing is just to have, let's say, 100 of 1,000. This is a different level of the game, and that means that a layer of, let's say, of secure communications between those drones, independent but secure communication, that is also a must. I don't think that the gentleman on my right is quite favorable of, let's say, using cloud systems. Well, probably not. Yeah, okay. Yes, that is. But what they call a combat cloud system, just a local one, that's also something that.
I could have a right to reply very quickly.
You have to be very. You have to be very quick.
Actually, I'm going to put a big punt out for NATO in the cloud. We're really moving forward quickly on this. You're right. I think defence was a late adopter. They've recognised the potential and actually the requirement, the necessity of making that move. We've just literally put about half of our command structure onto an unclassified cloud, only unclassified at the moment, but that's partly as a risk reduction measure about how we can move to higher classifications and ultimately to combat cloud. So no, we're cloud convertees.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. If I can, first of all, and I will just make one very additional, I suppose, two very quick comments. One, of course, is the degree to which the zeitgeist has moved on, that increasingly defense and security is in these sorts of conversations. I understand defense and security was barely mentioned probably in the room here last year. It would now be slightly bizarre not to mention it. So how the zeitgeist is moving into that direction, sadly as that might be. Secondly, the importance of private sector capital in this from a defense perspective. In terms of the horizon scanning for brilliance, the view from the inside defense looking out is a very difficult one. Kind of been there, been responsible for developing capability from the inside. It's very easy to get snow blinded. There's lots of money, but there's no money because so much of it is tied up into long-term programs. There is a role for the private sector to be doing that horizon scanning and to be obviously backing these businesses. And of course, the potential returns are significant. So I would just sort of play it back slightly into that space. But finally, thank you, if I can, to Gillian, Nick, and Enrique for what I hope has been a useful and informative discussion. Thanks.